A man thought he was saving a helpless puppy abandoned on a rainy roadside. Its tiny body trembled in his hands, its oversized eyes begging for comfort. He wrapped it in his shirt, carried it home, and promised to protect it. But as days passed, strange behaviors emerged. Sounds no puppy should make. Movements far too sharp. Eyes that glowed in the dark. Concerned, he rushed it to the vet. The doctor's face drained the color, his hands shaking as he whispered the truth. What the man had brought home wasn't a puppy at all, and the revelation shocked everyone. The rain had just begun to fall, a light drizzle tapping against the windshield as David drove down the lonely country road. It was late, the kind of late where the world feels asleep, where every shadow on the roadside seems alive. He was tired from work and eager to get home, but fate had other plans. Up ahead, something moved. A small dark shape trembled at the edge of the pavement, half hidden in the tall grass. David slowed down, squinting through the rain. At first, he thought it might be a kitten, but then the shape lifted its head, and two enormous glassy eyes reflected in the beam of his headlights. His heart clenched. It was tiny, fragile, and shivering. "Oh, no," David muttered, pulling over quickly. He stepped out, rain dampening his shirt, and crouched low near the trembling creature. It was no bigger than the palm of his hand, with slick, jet-black fur plastered flat from the rain. Its ears looked too big for its head, and its little body shook violently. David's first thought was simple. Puppy! Someone had abandoned it. He felt anger rise in his chest. "Who could do this?" he whispered, carefully extending his hand. The creature didn't bark, didn't whimper. Instead, it let out the faintest squeak, almost like a kitten's cry. Its tiny claws clung desperately to David's fingers as he lifted it from the ground. The weight, or rather the lack of it, nearly broke his heart. David cradled it gently against his chest, shielding it from the rain. The creature blinked up at him with wide, liquid eyes, as though recognizing he was its only chance. In that instant, something shifted inside him. He wasn't just picking up a stray animal. He was rescuing a life. Back at his truck, David wrapped the trembling body in an old flannel shirt. "It's okay, little one. You're safe now," he whispered. The puppy curled into the warmth, its tiny tongue peeking out as it drifted into an exhausted sleep. The drive home felt surreal. David kept glancing at the bundle beside him, his heart softening with every breath it took. But as the minutes passed, he couldn't shake one unsettling thought. Something about this creature seemed different. Its head was oddly shaped, more rounded than a typical puppy's. Its eyes were larger, darker, almost too expressive. David brushed the thoughts aside. After all, what else could it be besides a puppy? Still, when he pulled into his driveway, the rain now falling heavier, he felt an inexplicable chill. Holding the bundle close, he whispered again, "Don't worry, I'll take care of you." David placed the tiny bundle on a soft towel in his living room, his hands moving carefully as if handling something made of glass. The little creature stirred, blinking against the sudden warmth of the house. Its enormous eyes glistened in the lamplight. "Poor thing," he murmured, gently stroking its damp fur. The creature squeaked again, soft, high-pitched, but nothing like the yip of a puppy. It clutched the towel with surprising strength for something so small. He set a shallow dish of warm milk on the floor. The creature sniffed the air, wobbled forward unsteadily, and then lapped at the liquid with surprising eagerness. David smiled, relief washing over him. "That's it, buddy. You're going to be okay." There was something mesmerizing about the way it moved, light, almost silent, like a shadow flickering across the floor. Its tail twitched rhythmically, its ears twitching at every small sound. Even in its fragile state, it seemed unusually alert, constantly studying its surroundings. That night, he made a small bed from a shoe box, lining it with an old sweatshirt. The creature nestled into it immediately, but when David tried to step away, it squeaked loudly, scrambling toward the edge. David chuckled softly. All right. You want company." Against his better judgment, he let it sleep curled on his pillow. By morning, He had already given a name, Shadow. It seemed fitting for something so small and dark, a mysterious little companion who had appeared out of nowhere. As the days passed, Shadow settled into the house like it had always belonged. But it wasn't like any puppy David had ever raised. Shadow didn't bark or whine. Instead, it made odd chirping sounds, sometimes low, sometimes sharp. Its eyes seemed almost too expressive, following him wherever he went. And unlike most pups, Shadow didn't stumble clumsily. Its movements were precise, fluid, almost cat-like. Despite the oddities, David's attachment grew stronger. He took photos, shared them with friends, who responded with confusion. "That's the weirdest puppy I've ever seen," one texted. Another joked, "Are you sure the dog?" David brushed it off. Shadow was his responsibility now, his family. But beneath the warmth of their growing bond lingered a shadow of unease. The more time he spent with Shadow, the more certain David became. This wasn't just a puppy. It was something else, something he couldn't quite name. At first, David convinced himself that Shadow's quirks were simply part of being a young pup. But as the days turned into weeks, the little creature's oddities became harder to ignore. Shadow never barked. Not once. There were no playful yips, no whines for food, no excited greetings at the door. Instead, it made strange chirping sounds that echoed oddly in the quiet house. Each time, Shadow's wide black eyes fixed on him, almost as if testing his reaction. Then there was the way it moved. Unlike clumsy puppies that stumbled as they grew, Shadow was unnervingly graceful. Its tiny body glided across the floor, claws clicking softly against the wood. It could leap onto furniture far higher than David thought possible. Once he watched in stunned silence as it scrambled up the back of the couch in a single fluid motion, balancing perfectly on the edge like a miniature predator. Friends who visited were quick to notice. "That doesn't look like a puppy," one neighbor said cautiously. "Are you sure you know what that is?" David laughed it off, though unease prickled at the back of his mind. At night, the strangeness became undeniable. Shadow seemed most alive when the house went dark. While David struggled to sleep, the creature prowled quietly from room to room. Its eyes glowed faintly in the darkness, twin orbs that caught the slightest glimmer of moonlight. More than once, David woke to find Shadow perched on the dresser, staring down at him with unnerving intensity. Food was another puzzle. Shadow refused dog kibble, no matter how David disguised it. Milk and soft scraps worked for a while, but then it began showing unusual preferences, sniffing curiously at raw meat, even hissing faintly when David tried to pull it away. Puppies didn't hiss. The tipping point came one evening when David carried Shadow outside. A neighbor's dog barked loudly from across the fence. Shadow stiffened, its tiny body trembling, not with fear, but with something darker. It let out a low, guttural sound David had never heard before. The barking dog went silent, tail between its legs, backing away. David's stomach dropped. He stood frozen, clutching Shadow in his arms. For the first time since finding the little creature, he wasn't sure what he was holding. And that night, unable to ignore the unease any longer, David made a decision. Tomorrow he would take Shadow to the vet. The next morning dawned gray and heavy. David placed Shadow gently into a small carrier lined with a blanket. The little creature chirped softly, wide eyes blinking up at him as if sensing something was wrong. "It's okay, buddy. We're just going to make sure you're healthy," David said, swallowing hard. Inside the clinic, the waiting room buzzed with the usual chaos. Dogs barking, cats meowing, the smell of disinfectant heavy in the air. David sat clutching the carrier close to his chest. A little girl pointed from across the room. "Mommy, look at that puppy. It's so tiny." When his name was finally called, relief and dread crashed together inside him. Dr. Mitchell entered moments later, a kind-faced woman with decades of experience. "So what do we got here today?" she asked warmly. David lifted Shadow out of the carrier, placing him on the examination table. The tiny creature blinked under the bright light, ears twitching. Dr. Mitchell leaned forward, her expression neutral at first. Looks young. Very young. Where did you find it? On the side of the road. David explained quickly. It was raining, and I thought it was a puppy someone dumped. The vet didn't respond right away. She adjusted her glasses, gently touching Shadow's head, then lifting one of its paws. Her brow furrowed. She checked its teeth, its ears, its claws. The longer the exam went on, the more her face shifted from curiosity to concern, then to something colder. David's heart began to race. Is something wrong? Dr. Mitchell didn't answer immediately. She stepped back, staring down at the creature as if trying to process what she was seeing. Her hands trembled slightly as she reached for her clipboard. Shadow chirped, the strange sound echoing through the sterile room. The vet froze. Slowly, she looked at David, her face pale. You said you thought this was a puppy? David nodded quickly. Yes, isn't it? Dr. Mitchell's throat worked as she swallowed. Her voice was quieter now, edged with disbelief. No, this is not a puppy. The room went dead silent. David blinked, the words not sinking in. He glanced at Shadow, who sat calmly on the table, staring back with those enormous, unblinking eyes. For the first time, David felt a chill crawl up his spine. What do you mean? He asked, his voice cracking. The vet didn't answer immediately. Finally, she straightened, her expression grave. I need to know exactly where you found this. Every detail right now. David's mouth went dry. His mind replayed the rain, the roadside, the moment he scooped the trembling figure into his arms. Dr. Mitchell exhaled slowly. Listen carefully. This is not a puppy. Not even close. Then what is it? David's stomach dropped. She leaned closer to the little creature, pointing at its oversized ears, its unusual jawline, the sharpness of its claws. Puppies don't have features like this. Their eyes don't glow this way. Their movements aren't this precise. What you've brought here isn't domesticated. It's wild. David's pulse thundered in his ears. Wild? You mean like a fox? The vet shook her head grimly. No, not any ordinary animal you'd see roaming nearby. She paused. David, you've been keeping a predator in your house. The words crashed over him like thunder. He looked down at Shadow, still nestled calmly, its tiny chest rising and falling, as though it were the most harmless thing in the world. A predator? No, it's just a baby. It needed help. That's exactly what makes it dangerous. Dr. Mitchell's gaze hardened. Right now, it's small, defenseless even. But in a few months, this creature could become lethal. Its instincts are not like a dog's. It isn't wired to bond with humans. David's hands trembled. What is it? Based on the features, Dr. Mitchell continued, her voice heavy, I'd say it's a young wolf cub, or possibly something rarer. Maybe even an exotic predator smuggled into this region. A wolf. The word felt impossible. Illegal wildlife trafficking, she explained. People smuggle exotic animals across borders, selling them as pets. Cubs are easy to move because they're small. Many don't survive. Those that do often end up abandoned when their owners realize they can't control them. The words hit David like a blow. He pictured Shadow left in a cramped cage, ripped from its mother. Dr. Mitchell's tone softened. David, I don't doubt your intentions. You saved its life. But wild animals, even cubs, don't lose their instincts. Keeping one is dangerous for you and unfair for the animal. It belongs in the wild or in the care of specialists. David glanced at Shadow, who had climbed onto his arm, curling against him with surprising affection. The warmth of his body pressed into his chest, and his heart twisted. But look at him, David whispered, voice breaking. He needs me. I understand. Dr. Mitchell's eyes softened with sympathy. But sometimes the kindest thing we can do is let go. The room fell silent. Shadow wasn't a puppy. He never had been. And the realization left David with a terrifying question. What had he really brought into his home? David sat in his truck outside the clinic, the rain pattering softly against the windshield. Shadow was curled in the carrier on the passenger seat, eyes half closed. To anyone else, it was just a dangerous animal. But to David, it was family. His mind churned with Dr. Mitchell's words. A predator. Dangerous. None of it matched the creature he had fed, cradled, and carried against his chest at night. Shadow had looked to him for safety, had pressed its little head into his palm with trust. Yet deep down, fear whispered. If Shadow truly was wild, what would happen when it grew? Already its movements were sharper, its cries more haunting. David's hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, torn between two worlds. Keeping Shadow meant risking the safety of others. Giving him up meant breaking a bond that had already rooted itself deep inside David's soul. Shadow stirred in the carrier, letting out a soft chirp, eyes opening to meet David's. The look was innocent, trusting, almost pleading. "What am I supposed to do with you?" he whispered. By the next day, the story had spread. A neighbor had posted a photo online with the caption, "Man rescues mysterious puppy, but is it really a dog?" Within hours, the post went viral. The comments flooded in, some charmed, others alarmed. Soon, local reporters showed up at David's driveway, microphones in hand. "Is it true you've been raising a wild cub? Did you know it could be dangerous?" David, overwhelmed, shielded Shadow in his arms, refusing to answer. Within days, the town was divided. At the grocery store, strangers praised him. "You saved that poor thing. You're a hero." At the park, others whispered behind his back, "Irresponsible. That animal could hurt someone." Town officials grew concerned. The word confiscation began to spread. The local news station aired a segment. "A man in our community believes he rescued a puppy, but experts say it may in fact be a wild cub. Should such animals be allowed in homes?" David felt the walls closing in. One night while walking Shadow in his backyard, he overheard neighbors arguing. "That animal doesn't belong in a house. If it's wild, it's dangerous." The other countered, "He saved its life. Are we supposed to punish him for showing compassion?" The pressure mounted. People left notes on his doorstep, some urging him to keep Shadow, others demanding he give the cub up immediately. Through it all, Shadow remained unchanged. He still curled against David's chest at night, still chirped softly when he returned home, still watched him with those haunting, knowing eyes. And in that divide, David realized something chilling. The decision might no longer be his alone. Finally, a letter arrived from the State Wildlife Authority, requesting that he bring the animal in for evaluation. The paper trembled in his hands. This was no longer just a personal choice. The law was stepping in. That night, David sat on the living room floor with Shadow curled in his lap. The cub purred, chirping softly in his sleep. David's hand stroked the soft fur again and again, his throat aching. Every instinct screamed to protect him. Yet Dr. Mitchell's words haunted him. "It belongs in the wild. Keeping isn't fair." David closed his eyes, imagining Shadow months from now. Larger, stronger, instinct sharpened. Would the cub still curl against his chest? Or would those instincts turn? The next morning, David made his decision. He packed a small bag with Shadow's towel, the flannel shirt he had first wrapped him in, and the toy he had chewed on endlessly. With each item, his heart fell heavier. Finally, he placed Shadow gently in the carrier. The cub chirped in protest, pawing at the bars, not understanding. David whispered, "It's okay, buddy. I'm not abandoning you. I'm giving you what you deserve, a chance to be free." At the Wildlife Center, officials met him with solemn expressions. Papers were signed, questions answered. Then came the hardest part, handing over the carrier. David lingered, his hand pressed against the side, eyes burning. Shadow stared back, wide-eyed and unblinking, as if sensing goodbye. Tears blurred David's vision as he whispered the final words. "Thank you for letting me be part of your story." The staff carried Shadow away, and the sound of his chirps fading down the hall, nearly broke David in two. He stood frozen, his chest hollow. Yet deep inside, a quiet peace stirred. He had done the right thing. For the first time, David understood. Sometimes love means holding on, but sometimes it means letting go. The days after saying goodbye were heavy with silence. David's house felt emptier than ever, the absence of tiny chirps and wide, watchful eyes echoing in every corner. He caught himself glancing at the shoe box bed or listening for claws tapping softly against the floor. But the space remained still. And yet, despite the ache in his chest, David knew he had made the right choice. Shadow was no longer trapped between two worlds. He was in the hands of experts, with a chance to grow as he was meant to, not as a pet, not as someone's secret, but as a creature in nature, free to fulfill the life he was born for. David often thought back to that rainy night on the roadside. He had believed he was rescuing a helpless puppy. In truth, he had stumbled into a far bigger story, one about the delicate line between kindness and responsibility. He had learned that compassion is more than saving something. It's making choices that sometimes break your heart. The town eventually quieted. The debates faded. But the story lived on. Schools used it as a lesson about wildlife conservation. Families told as a reminder not to judge by appearances. And to David, it remained something deeper. A reminder that life can surprise us in ways we never expect. On quiet evenings, he still walked the same road where he first found Shadow. Sometimes he imagined hearing that tiny squeak again, seeing wide eyes glinting in the dark grass. A part of him would always miss the little creature that had curled into his chest, trusting him completely. But another part of him took comfort in knowing he had given Shadow what mattered most, a future. In the end, Shadow's story wasn't just about an animal found on a roadside. It was about the choices we make when faced with responsibility. It was about love, sacrifice, and the courage to let go. And as David stood beneath the same storm-cooled sky where it all began, he whispered softly to himself, "Sometimes the scariest truths bring the most important lessons."